Welcome to this edition of our weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China, in which we examine various aspects of the war that the Chinese Communist Party has been waging against the United States for decades. Unrestricted warfare. They notified us in May of 2019 that it was now a people's war as well. Not content with that, it seems they are moving inexorably in the direction of a shooting war as well. But top of mind at the moment is the evidence that the Chinese Communist Party is ramping up rather dramatically the economic component of the warfare that it is, with devastating effect engaged in against America since at least the early 1990s. And this program is dedicated to examining what has been happening on that front of late with the direct engagement, it would appear, of Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist dictator, and President Donald J. Trump. And it seems, in addition, a large number of other people in what the president has described as the free world and the leadership thereof. We're going to try to lay out in some detail what all this looks like, what it is likely to inflict upon us in terms of further harm if the Chinese communists have their way, and most especially what we in the United States not only can, but must be doing to mitigate the damage that the Chinese have already done, to prevent further harm, and, as is the profound hope of our Committee on the Present Danger China, with the ultimate result of bringing down the Chinese Communist Party, liberating the people of China with whom we have no quarrel, and eliminating, if at all possible, the mortal threat that the Chinese communists represent in all the aforementioned ways. We're going to begin the program with a contribution from, I believe, a first-time participant in these programs. We've had about 215 of them, I think, so it's long overdue, but we're very pleased to have Nick Iacovella with us, from an esteemed partner in much of what the committee is doing. That would be the Coalition for a Prosperous America. He is its communications director. He served in a similar role previously with then United States Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who has gone on to bigger and better things. He now serves as the Secretary of State. He is also the acting national security advisor to the president. And I think I'm missing a couple of other jobs that he's also carrying forth on. We so appreciate his work, as well as that of his former employee, I should say, Nicholas Iacovella. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. You have perhaps the most important portfolio in your present role with respect to the economic warfare dimensions of our challenge posed by the CCP. We're going to lead with you, and we will bring along others who have various other perspectives, but in interest of facilitating your participation in this program in a busy day, we'll start with you. Over to you now, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Thanks so much for having me. And we've been partners in a lot of issues, including, not just the CPA's economic aggression, their warfare, but really also how Wall Street and our U.S. capital markets are funding China. And so I look forward to continuing to work with you guys on that front because it's an incredibly important issue. So I think just at the outset, um, China obviously made a massive announcement, just about a week ago that it would seek to restrict essentially every product that it makes, using the rare earth export restrictions. That was a massive wake-up call, I think, for all of the people in Washington who were not yet convinced that China would take such a drastic step, to really declare war on the rest of the world. And I think Secretary Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, he has been such a great voice in speaking the truth about this problem, unlike, previous Treasury secretaries. He's even made comments, like, we are not going to be deterred by a downturn in the market to do what is in the national interest of the United States. And I think having a Treasury Secretary like that is incredibly important. He's made it clear this is U.S., with the world against China. Obviously, Ambassador Greer, he's been on these issues for such a long time. We were honored to have him at our annual conference in May. And he told us quite explicitly that the Trump administration 2.0 is very clear-eyed about what's happening with China. And I think what we've seen to date is absolutely the most historic deployment of policies really in history to address what I would call, China's decades-long war against us to make us subservient to their economy really in every way. Um, I think we should be very clear about this. We are no longer in a world where free trade at any cost serves America's interests. Uh, Free trade does not exist in the real world, but I know there's plenty of economists in DC and academic, institutions around the country that would like the average American to think there's some, rainbows and butterflies version of free trade out there where we can trade with countries like China and we're going to be better off. It's just absolutely false. Today, we are in a world where economic strength, domestic production, and national security, those are all one and the same. And, that is what we work on at CPA. We represent domestic producers across a widespread breadth of the U.S. economy, over 24 sectors. Um, any person watching the show, any product that you're using, we probably have a member that makes that product. The inputs to those products our members make. And so that's what we're doing each and every day. We are seeing, how can we end this global dependency on the CCP? We are actively engaged in a number of fronts with the Trump administration. Today, actually, our economics team, which is really second to none, they are absolute all stars in diagnosing why we have these dependencies on China, where our domestic production capabilities have been just annihilated by poor trade policy, and frankly, also just globalist policies that have put capital into places like China to offshore our production and jobs. But today, our team is working on two submissions to the Commerce Department. If you've been following the Section 232 investigations by the Commerce Department, these are their national security investigations where they can look at an entire sector of the U.S. economy and decide on a national security basis that it's essential that we have domestic production of those industries. We want imports to go down. We want our supply chain resiliency, our domestic production capacity, jobs, everything to go up. And so we are working incredibly hard with the entire administration, and particularly the folks at Commerce, Undersecretary Jeff Kessler at BIS. He has been a fantastic leader over there and really diagnosing what's going on and putting forward these solutions to reshore industry. So today, the medical device, medical consumables, and PPE submissions are due. The pandemic seems a little bit now in the rearview mirror. I think when I was still working on the Hill, we had a pretty good idea that China had weaponized the virus and unleashed it on the world. I'm glad to see now that what was once called a conspiracy theory or a hoax, that we're being honest with people about that now, that's what happened. It didn't just originate in some market. But again, we have not learned any lessons from the pandemic. We do not make gloves. We do not make PPE, masks, gowns. We have some production of syringes. We don't make generic drugs in this country. Senator Rick Scott, who's been, just an incredible voice in Congress and even before, when he was governor of Florida, but absolutely as he's been in DC as Florida's now senior senator. He just had a letter to the editor in the Wall Street Journal published yesterday, saying that America does need to make our own generic drugs. The Trump administration has a 232 investigation on pharmaceutical products that includes generics. So this is an issue that we have been working on for years. We have a complete dependency on China and India for the drugs that make up 90+% of prescriptions dispensed each and every day. The president in 2023, he did this video, part of the Agenda 47 website, where he said, we need to bring back essential medicine production to the United States. And he is exactly right. I mean, the president has been, incredibly uh, foresighted in looking at these issues even before he came into office again. And so this investigation is a perfect example of how we need to bring back essential products. Essential medicines are generic drugs. So that's a little bit about what we've been working on at CPA. Our team is working on pretty much every issue of the China fight that you could imagine. We're working on tariffs, on industrial policy, on trade issues. A number of our members recently launched, and if you go to enforcementnow.com, you will see, but a number of our members launched an initiative. It's called the Industry Alliance for Trade Enforcement Now. So we can put in place all these great policies, and the president, President Trump has certainly done more than I think any president in history of countering China with the tools available to him. But we also need those to be enforced properly. And so as we continue to see more 232 investigations be finalized, as they do more potential deals with allies, we have the reciprocal tariffs, we have the universal tariffs, but we have these 232s really by industry. That's how we're going to reshore production. Enforcing those things is going to be absolutely critical. I tell folks that, work in the government and that are our partners, we can have, speed limits, but if there's nobody there to enforce it, people are going to go past the speed limit. And, it's the same thing with trade. China alone on the 301s, it's $200+ billion of trade fraud that's cost the U.S. economy. That's countless workers, jobs, manufacturing facilities. So, we do work on trade policies, but enforcement also is incredibly, incredibly important. So, if you go to our website, prosperousamerica.org, you will see we are writing on these topics all the time. We're actively engaged with the White House and the executive branch agencies. And, I thank you all at the committee for really being right alongside us on all these issues too. So thank you for your work.
Well, back at you. Thank you, Nick, for both the work that you and your team are doing, as well as helping us have a better appreciation of it. Wanted to make sure we teased out one particular issue on which I know CPA has been very directly involved. You mentioned it in your opening comment, I think, and that is this idea of our financing the Chinese Communist Party. And as you know, Nick, this was one of the things that I think your former boss was passionate about during his time in the Senate, and I presume is still very concerned about, and that is this preferential access to our capital markets that was uniquely given to the Chinese Communist Party by Joe Biden and the Obama administration, of which he was, of course, a part. But during his tenure as vice president, as you know, he helped engineer this memorandum of understanding that gave the Chinese, of all people, the companies, including those working directly for the People's Liberation Army, building weapons with which to kill Americans, have this opportunity to get into our capital markets, extract large amounts of money from them without having to comply with our laws or securities regulations. Are you of the view that that arrangement must be terminated by
Absolutely.
something I think that the SEC chairman could do on 30 days notice?
No, absolutely. And I do think that Secretary Bessent at Treasury also understands that this is our trump card. I've been calling it the trump card. We should play it. We should not allow. There are dozens of sanctions lists that exist in the executive branch. We have the entity list. We have the Chinese military company list. We have the UFLPA entity list. I remember back when I was working for then Senator Rubio and Roger Robinson, who I know
Hmm.
is well known to the committee. Roger
Indeed.
was the chief architect of the sanctions that crippled the Soviet Union. He was Ronald Reagan's National Security Council Director for International Economic Affairs. He's been a trusted advisor at CPA, but he's honestly been a trusted advisor to me personally well before I came to CPA. And we're nearing on almost a decade now of work together. And I remember the first time he called me and he said, "Nick, does your boss know, does Senator Rubio know that we are funding Chinese companies that are designing weapons to kill our servicemen and women on the battlefield?" And I told him, I said, "That sounds insane." And I mean, frankly, I was a little bit uh, skeptical that this actually was taking place. I was quickly shown that it is happening by Roger, and I will tell you, Senator Rubio was the first senator and really first lawmaker in the entire U.S. Congress to say this is a problem. We should be stopping this. And since then, we really have built up just a massive amount of awareness on this. But it just makes no sense. We should not be funding any type of China's economic activity. They need access to dollars to continue their economy. We are funding things like their entire nuclear program. Companies like BlackRock, FTSE Russell, MSCI, Vanguard. It's not like it's some company that we've never heard of who has a backdoor into the U.S. capital markets and is helping the CCP. These are Wall Street titans. you know that is what is happening. And I know last year we were successful in getting a number of legislative packages introduced by Congress to tackle this problem, and these are bipartisan. Rick Scott has an excellent package to tackle this exact problem. Senator Scott. Also, in the House, we saw Congresswoman Victoria Spartz and Congressman Brad Sherman also introduce a package, bipartisan basis. So there's clearly an acknowledgement from lawmakers that this is a serious issue. And I do think that the administration really should consider deploying these measures to stop this flow of capital. We should not be funding companies that are engaged in the PLA modernization, in the genocide and Orwellian surveillance of the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region, of really it's all of China's economy. I mean, you cannot stress enough that we are funding essentially every sector that they have. And look at what they're doing with these companies. They are already subsidizing these companies. They're using them to undercut U.S. markets, American workers. I mean, China's idea of trade, and sometimes we hear balanced trade. China's idea of trade is they get all the industries, all the jobs, all the profits, all the production. We are completely dependent on them. And, recently in the last, 5 to 7 years, in return, we get fentanyl. I don't think that we should also minimize that they are literally seeking to kill our population from within too. It's an evil regime. We have to deploy these tools to stop this flow of capital. It is the biggest weapon in our arsenal, and we have to do it for our national and economic security. Absolutely.
Amen to all of that, Nick, and thank you again for your leadership and that of Roger Robinson. I've had the privilege of working with him, I think, for 40 years, so I value it too, as you know. We will let you go and look forward to collaborating further. Nick, there's particularly in this space of actually reshoring productive capabilities, whether it's in the medicine space or strategic metals or other applications. This is place where I know you're doing important work, and we are very, very keen to assist in any way we can. God bless you, my friend. We're going to go through several of the presentations that are by video. I'm hoping that our other live guest, John Lanchowski, can stay with us, partly because he does a magnificent job of synthesizing information and concluding these programs. We're going to go to first frequent contributor to the program. His name is Charles Sam Faddis. Sam is, again, I think by virtue of his appearances here and in Steve Bannon's War Room and our show, Securing America, very well known to our friends and audience. He is a now retired undercover operative of the Central Intelligence Agency with extensive experience in the field, but also serving as, in his last incarnation at Langley headquarters, responsibility for addressing the threat of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, and the like. Sam is also an Army veteran, as well as a former assistant attorney general in Washington State, the author of numerous books, and the prime mover behind a terrific online resource, and magazine.substack.com, and a member of our committee on the present danger of China. He and I had a very interesting conversation about the doctrine that the Chinese are pursuing in the course of a program we taped earlier as we speak today. And we wanted to give you a selection from that powerful interview. I commend to you the entirety of it, which will air on Real America's Voice tomorrow. Let's go to the edited version of Sam Faddis's presentation now.
It all flows from this, right? The communist Chinese do not wish coexistence. They don't want to get along. They don't want to just, have a better quality of life. That is not the objective. The objective is to dominate the planet, become the preeminent power, and what that means is obviously going through us. So to destroy us and subjugate us, and that is the objective. And everything flows from that objective, world domination. And obviously we are the power they have to supplant in order to make that happen. So everything they do, political, economic, military, has that objective. So if you look at economics, the economy, they don't want to just have a higher standard of living for their people or any of these other things that the average American would think is what we want. They want to destroy us. And they are smart people and strategic thinkers, and they certainly understand what happened in the Second World War when the world's largest economy, ours, was able to churn out tanks and aircraft and equip not only our forces but the Allied forces. So they have very methodically pursued that objective for decades now, to devastating result, right? As I live in Pennsylvania, I can drive from town to town to town where there used to be a mill, there used to be a mine, there used to be a factory. It isn't there anymore. And now there are dollar stores and closed storefronts and people living in mobile homes or living in houses that were built 75 years ago and are about to fall down. They have hollowed us out very, very, very effectively. And with the help, obviously, of a lot of Americans who keep telling us, even now, decades later, that somehow or another this entanglement with the Chinese is going to benefit us. We're somehow going to benefit. I mean, the original story was they will liberalize and democratize and become like us. Well, that didn't happen. They are at least as authoritarian as they ever were. They're just a heck of a lot more dangerous now, is where we are. I'm struggling to come up with the exact word. I think suicidal is the word I want to use, right? So we transfer our industrial base to China, in effect. We provide the money. We pump money into China to enable all of this. I mean, we send massive amounts of American capital into China to help them build all of this, while simultaneously, of course, we cling to this idea that we have some technological edge, but we're allowing them to, I was going to say erode, but that's a way too mild a term. They are looting us of that. So we're not only building their factories for them to build the things they'll use to kill us, but we're effectively doing their R&D for them simultaneously. So they don't have to develop an F-35 fighter bomber. They can just steal all the plans and then go build it in the factories that we are paying to build. And I guess at the end of this, there are a relatively small number of Americans who are getting filthy rich in the interim off of this, and I guess it doesn't matter to them that their children and grandchildren may well be living in a country that is completely dominated and controlled by the communist Chinese, because in the meantime they're buying new yachts. But it really is suicidal. We're killing ourselves.
You had in your last duty station in the Central Intelligence Agency, as I'm fond of pointing out, the responsibility to try to protect this country against weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, and the like. There is a report that the defense minister of China, about 20 years ago, spoke to a closed meeting of party leaders. His name was Xi Jinping, a general. And he reported that the Chinese Communist Party's biological warfare program had been given the responsibility of depopulating the United States so that it could be colonized by China. Do you believe that is possible or actually the case, and that it would be an instrument for bringing about the kind of conquest that you're talking about, Sam?
Sure. I mean, what we're talking about is a biological neutron bomb, right? You leave the infrastructure intact and just kill off all of the people. And looking at where we stand in terms of biotech and what we've already experienced, there's no question that they have the capacity to do that. And these are people who are prepared right now to knock out all of our critical infrastructure, take down the grid, throw us back into the 1500s. Are we really supposed to question whether or not they would be willing to do that? I mean, that seems to be self-evident, right?
Self-evident indeed, and yet not well understood by altogether too many Americans, even, unfortunately, it seems, in leadership positions in some cases. We're going to turn next to another very frequent contributor to the program. His name is Gordon G. Chang. We had a chance to talk with Gordon earlier in the week, drawing on his acumen over many years on matters involving the Chinese Communist Party, specifically the work that he is doing now as a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, a columnist for Newsweek, and the author most recently of Plan Red, China's project to destroy America. We wanted to get his take on what might be animating, in addition to what Sam has just described in terms of the doctrine of the Chinese Communist Party, some particularly challenging political circumstances that could be contributing to the ratcheting up of the unrestricted warfare and the economic piece of it particularly. Let's go to Gordon's contribution, also from an interview I conducted with him earlier this week on Securing America.
We know that there is turmoil at the top of the Communist Party. We don't know how bad it is. We don't know who's winning and losing. But I think that what it's doing is it's forcing people to take hardline positions in Beijing, which is the reason why we saw those enhanced rare earth rules last Wednesday. And of course, they've pushed too far. President Trump had to announce the 100% tariffs starting the additional 100% tariffs starting November 1st. Trump is now talking about banning Chinese cooking oil in the United States. This is just one thing after another, and we can see the trajectory because China right now can't deal constructively with the United States or probably, for that matter, with any other country. drill bits from China are now being restricted because they're considered to be related to rare earth technology. So these are comprehensive rules, and we can see where this is going. We are delinking from China, and China's delinking from us. And actually, I think that's a good thing because we shouldn't be enriching a hostile state. We should be cutting off the blood supply to those who mean us harm. And that's the direction that we're going. The world is moving in a very different way than it did after the Cold War.
I'm sure you caught the president in his initial response to the surprise of this delinking, as you put it, by China, talked about financially responding to this threat. That would seem to imply not just tariffs, but also using what is arguably the biggest stick we have of all, namely the opportunity, I believe, long overdue opportunity to restrict the Chinese Communist Party's companies' access to our capital markets. And you and I have talked about this a lot. You have done wonderful work elsewhere, including on Maria Bartiromo's show, pressing the case that this is simply not acceptable, that we are underwriting our mortal enemy, including its military companies. So is that a coupling that has to end, Gordon? Well, and what is being done in that regard, if anything, sir?
Well, it certainly has to end. We go back to February where the president issued his America First investment policy memorandum, which basically was a divorce between the United States and China in the financial area. It looked like that memorandum looked like a dead letter for a little while because, Trump talked about Chinese investment in the U.S. And we learned from Bloomberg reporting recently that the Chinese proposed to invest at least $1 trillion in the U.S. if we were going to relax export controls and give them concessions on tariffs. I don't think that proposal is going to go very far, and largely because the Chinese are pushing us in ways that we can't respond favorably to that proposal. So I think the American First Policy Memorandum, which looked a little bit tired a few months ago, very well may be brought back in full force. And that would be a great thing because we need to get Chinese companies out of our markets. And we need to get American investment banks out of Chinese markets as well.
I'm a big fan of this America First investment policy, Gordon. And in fact, Brian Kennedy and I, Chairman and Vice Chairman, respectively, of the Committee on the Present Danger China, with which you have worked closely over the years, wrote the president very strongly encouraging the full implementation of that policy. It's on the books as the policy of the United States government, but it hasn't really been implemented as far as I can tell, either in the inbound investment aspects, which is explicitly described there as trying to restrict the Chinese access to, things like farmland and our research companies and industrial base and so on, technology, intellectual property, but also on the outbound side, the investment by Americans, mostly unwitting, let's be clear, through pension funds and mutual funds and exchange-traded funds and the like that Wall Street has continued to be sending towards China, if not directly through a Hong Kong pipeline or cutout, if you will. So are we, in fact, likely to see this policy now implemented, do you think, in earnest, Gordon? And if not, why the devil not?
Well, I think it's going to be the last piece that will be implemented, Frank, but I believe it will be. What we're seeing right now is trade friction, and we're seeing a delinking on trade. China's exports to the U.S. in September declined 27%, according to our figures, Chinese figures. It actually wasn't that dramatic because China is rerouting exports to the U.S. through places like Vietnam. But nonetheless, we're seeing a drop in China-U.S. trade. And of course, that's a good thing. That's where we're going to see the most progress first, but eventually we will get around to the markets. So that's on the agenda. And as I mentioned, as this friction continues, we're going to be looking at ways of imposing costs on China. And eventually they will get around to implementing the February memorandum.
And that might be triggered if come November 1st, the Chinese actually do cut off our imports of rare earth minerals, would you say?
It might be this year, but I think it's going to be later. I think that's going to be one of the last things that we will do for a number of reasons. So the relationship is heading towards a divorce. That's clear. The speed of it is affected by certain events. It can be accelerated or decelerated. And right now we're seeing a picking up of the pace. And that's a good thing because we do need to get ourselves to be sovereign. You know, a long time ago, Frank, I remember you saying we needed a rare earth stockpile. And your call was ignored. And now people are talking about that again because they realize we can't depend on the Chinese for things that we absolutely need.
Boy, is that ever true. And it's regrettable that, unfortunately, as has been the case, I'm sorry to report, with lots of warnings that our committee has been generating, they've not been heeded to date. We're going to talk about the strategic implications of that with our next guest, another regular contributor, another member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, the remarkable Captain James Fennell, United States Navy retired. He was the Chief of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet before he ended his distinguished career in naval intelligence. He is the co-author with Dr. Bradley Thayer of a book entitled Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. He is also a regular featured columnist for American Greatness. I commend to you his body of work. It's surpassingly important. Let's go to the video of yet another interview that I had earlier this week with Captain Fennell at Securing America on Real America's Voice.
There's no question that we are in a war with the People's Republic of China and specifically the Chinese Communist Party. We have talked a lot about it's a new type of a Cold War, but it is now, as you just described, it's gone to the next level to where we can clearly see it's an economic war that Beijing is waging against the United States. And they're very adept at explaining that it's not targeted against any one country. And they make all these kind of statements. But the fact of the matter is what they announced by saying that you can't sell rare earth elements or even sell them through a third party, those are not allowed to be, they've restricted that. And that is clearly aimed at the United States Department of Defense to make it impossible for us to be able to produce the kind of weapon systems that we need. Yes, it's incredible that we're dependent upon the People's Republic of China to be able to produce our own defense materials and weapons of war in this new War Department. So clearly that is an area that we need to correct. But for those who question whether or not we're in a war, we just have to listen to the PRC's ambassador to the United States, who last night in what they call this annual gala dinner that is hosted by the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations in New York City, Ambassador Xi Jinping said, China does not want to fight such a war, but neither will we sit idly by when our rights and interests are harmed and the international economic and trade rules as well as multilateral trading system are undermined. So they're couching what they did as some kind of defender of a new global order, but that they're also being attacked by the United States. So they've openly declared that they're in a war with us, and they're using these measures to essentially disarm America. And so this is really a dangerous period that we're in. Heretofore, we have been supplying the Chinese in what would be a one-sided economic war where we buy things from China and that money goes into their war coffers so that they can build this new aircraft carrier that launched, a fifth generation stealth fighter with electromagnetic aircraft launch system before the United States of America, or the strategic rocket force that has all kinds of missiles, supersonic, hypersonic, long range, medium range, short range, and a host of other military applications that we have been funding China on. And now they're essentially doubling down and saying, we're going to continue to take that money from you because you're going to continue to buy goods from China, and we're not going to allow you to have access to the critical materials that you need to build your own military. So they're going to continue to go up, and we're going to continue to go down at a faster rate in the ability to defend ourselves. Fortunately, the administration is aware of that, and the Department, Secretary of War and the Department of War is aware of that. And we understand that we have to get and decouple in this area. I believe we need to decouple across all economic arrangements. I don't even care if we're talking about retail items like clothes or whatever. We need to get out of supplying the People's Republic of China one thin dime. We just need to stop it altogether, because everything that we give to them turns around and is used against us. And right now, China believes by this action, this should be a major signal to everyone in Washington and to Americans, is that China feels confident enough that they can beat America and drive our economy into the ground, destabilize it, and also to destabilize the dollar, to make the dollar not to be used. We just saw also, along with this announcement about rare earth elements, China told one of our treaty allies in the Pacific, Australia, hey, we'll buy your iron ore, Australia, which you supply much to China and to the world. We'll buy it, but we're only going to buy it in our currency, RMB, the yuan. So China's basically saying, we're going to make a major play in the de-dollarization effort that we have, our strategy, to destabilize the American dollar and take it down. All the economists of the world have told us, the China expert economists have told us, we don't have to worry about the Chinese taking the dollar down. Well, 10, 15 years ago, the dollar was used by 80% of the world as the world's trading currency. Now it's down to 60%. Where will it be in 5 years? Where will it be in 10 years after these kinds of concerted attacks, like we're seeing, forcing Australia to sell their ore to China using RMB? And I know there's conditions to it. It's not on every contract, and its future contracts, there's specifics there. But the strategic trend line is very clear, that China is moving to make the dollar useless. The gold, as everyone knows, has gone through the roof. So they're going to shift over to a gold-based currency system. And China's been buying gold for the last 25 years like crazy. And so China will move into an area and say, our currency is now reliable and stable. We have the largest military. We have the strongest economy. We have the global governance initiative that the United Nations has bought into. We support multilateralism. It's the United States that's the outlier. It's the United States that's a unilateral actor of an old era, of a post-World War II era that no longer exists. They're the ones that are painting this picture. And Americans need to understand that we are still an economic powerhouse. And part of that is we need to stop buying stuff from China, both consumers, people that are watching this, yourselves, the people that are literally watching this video, stop buying things from China. And go and ask your stockbroker, where is your money going that you invest in your stocks? And if it's going to China, tell your stockbroker to get it out. United States government under President Trump has just done that with this de minimis issue. He said, hey, no more flooding our market with cheap crap made from China via Temu and all these online systems. We have to press back against this. Otherwise, China could win this.
Thank you, Captain Fennell. Shot across the bow, that is for sure, if I can use a nautical term. We're going to hear from one additional participant via the miracle of videotape and his interview that I did with him this morning on our program, Securing America. His name is Colonel Grant Newsom, no stranger, again, to this webinar series. He has served in both the uniform of the Marines and without a uniform as a Foreign Service officer in our embassy in Tokyo. He has been a businessman and entrepreneur in the Western Pacific for many years. He is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the author of a best-selling book entitled When China Attacks, A Warning to America. We're always grateful for his participation. He is stateside today, so it's not in the wee hours of the morning that we spoke, but he's nonetheless very, very much appreciated for his continuing contributions to our work and that of the Committee on the Present Danger China, of which he's a prominent member. Let's go to this final video with Colonel Grant Newsom.
We're in an economic war. Even Mr. Trump said it the other day when a reporter asked him if he was worried about it. He said something like that. He says, well, we're already in one. And that's the truth. The Chinese said the other day as much when they put the ban on rare earth exports to the U.S. They just said it out loud. They said it with brazenness and forcefulness. And there's no question about it. But this goes back a long time. And the Chinese economic assault on the United States started at least 40 years ago. And you go down the list of companies and industries that have been targeted and cleaned out and, with our cooperation and moved to China. You know, I used to work for Motorola, which used to be one of America's best companies. It went into China, turned over its technology, the rest of it was stolen, and the competition was built up, and now what is left of Motorola is owned by Chinese. Lately in the news, you've had these magnets that are essential for building all sorts of commercial and military hardware. Well, in the 90s, the Chinese came and bought General Motors, main magnet company that made magnets, moved it all to China, and the rest is history. And you go down the list, you go to any American city, and you can go through these places that look like war zones, but used to be nice working class neighborhoods, and that is because one industry after another was targeted by the Chinese, looted of its technology, even the actual factory materials and the machines were moved to China. And we went along with this, and the Chinese have been very clear about this. They call it economic warfare. They hollow out America. They put people out of work, and that ripens them up for the drug assault, which the Chinese launch on us. But economic warfare to the Chinese is just as much like a shooting war as we would see it, and we have allowed it to happen. Thank you, Wall Street. Thank you, business class. And thank you too much of Capitol Hill. This is, say, a systematic effort to destroy us, and they've had 30, 40 years of a free run, and they've done very well at it. We're just now sort of waking up. There's more awareness than there's ever been, but really we're talking about it. You notice President Trump's America First investment policy, which was announced towards the beginning of his administration. You read that, and that is a blueprint for taking on the Chinese. But now you have to do something. And we just have not done it the way we need to. Some states have tried to do it, and there's some good efforts afoot to sort of bring manufacturing back, and that is what is behind the Trump administration's strategy. But say they have not been as systematic, as widespread, overarching as they need to be. And until there's a sense of urgency, that it's just going to be piecemeal efforts. There's been progress, but you don't have the sense of urgency. You will find it in some places, say on Capitol Hill, for example, and in parts of America's business class. But as I say, after 30, 40 years of just getting hammered, it's taken a little while to turn this around. So, the Trump administration can't be blamed for not having fixed everything in 9 months.
You sort of alluded to this point, but maybe just to amplify it in connection with what needs to be done. The Chinese have made a very important part of their unrestricted warfare against our country, as you know, what they call elite capture. To the extent that it's the case on Wall Street, or elsewhere in the business sector, or in the media, or in academia, or in political life. On Capitol Hill, yes, in the executive branch, and the campaigns at governors and so on, that the Chinese have their hooks into so many of our leading lights. How important is it to correct that, and do you have thoughts as to how that can be done, sir?
Well, it's terrible, and it's worse than you can imagine. The Chinese have systematically gone about subverting our top leadership and all the way down to local levels as well. You'll find like city mayors and council members get invited on trips to China. China puts, and that always works, and that China invests in, they want to do it in every single county in America in order to get politicians, local politicians, state politicians, etc., all of them dependent on this Chinese business, and thus they will prevent the US government from doing anything that hurts Chinese interests. But in Washington, it's terrible. Just read Peter Schweizer's books. Blood Money is the most recent one. He lays out a prosecutor's brief, he names names, and nothing happens. Well, that tells you just how successful the Chinese have been. And what do you do? Well, it's going to take the Department of Justice and the FBI to charge somebody and imprison them for having done China's bidding like this. You have to make it so it's just the mark of Cain for a politician, for a lobbyist to take these people on as clients. And you look at, for example, who's representing these Chinese drone makers, the most prominent US law firms, the TikTok company. They have the best American law firms. Well, this is representing a company that takes organs out of live prisoners, has concentration camps, black prisons, and has said they want to kill us. That gives you some sense of really the moral wasteland that you'll find in America's elite classes. The Chinese have taken full advantage of it. So you have got to go after this and make it so these people see that, you know, I'm going to end up in jail. I'm going to lose everything if I keep doing China's bidding for them. And that's how serious this is. You know, we've always counted on having some time after we get hit, say in a war, but I don't think we'll have any time this time. We're not doing what's necessary, but it's going to take some forcefulness, as I say, to scare these people into recognizing whose country has given them their livelihoods and their decent lives.
A compelling argument for a course correction. I did want to just shamelessly plug a book on this very subject. My colleague Didi Laugesen and I wrote it 2 years ago now to synthesize a lot of information that we've brought together out of these webinars. At that time, about 70 of them. We've got twice that, 3 times that number now. The book is entitled The Indictment, Prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and Friends for Crimes Against America, China, and the World. And it is very much focused on how do you, at the very minimum, in the court of public opinion, expose, name, shame, if that's possible, those who are perpetrating these sorts of crimes against our country, to the great peril of all of us. We will be, I'm sure, touching on that with our next panelist and final guest. His name is John Lenczowski. Dr. Lenczowski has had a distinguished career of public service, both in government and in academia. He is the founder, the former president, and now chancellor of a marvelous institution, the Institute of World Politics, based in Washington, D.C. He has made teaching statecraft to young, aspiring national security professionals, a cause to which he has really devoted the better part of his life, and with spectacular results. John has served, among other places, on the National Security Council during the Reagan presidency and was part of the team that brought down the Soviet Union. The Soviet Communist Party is a good template, we believe, for what can be done and must to the Chinese Communist Party as well. And I hope he will speak to that as part of his rounding out this conversation about the economic warfare the Chinese have waged against us, part of the larger assault on our country, to be sure, but a very important part, and what might be done about it now. My friend, John Lenczowski, it's great to have you back. Thank you for taking some time. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm delighted to be with you and with such a distinguished group of your guests here who are just terrific. When I look at this problem, this problem has emerged because of a fundamental conceptual failure by our foreign policy and national security community. and that is the failure to understand that that there are many different forms of warfare, not just hurling missiles and shooting bullets and dropping bombs. And the fact that our Defense Department is pretty much restricts itself to these kinetic forms of warfare and doesn't have a division that is dedicated to economic warfare, information warfare, psychological warfare, political and ideological warfare. These are all, many of these are non-kinetic forms of conflict, which one would think we would attempt to use these before resorting to killing people to defend our vital national security interests. But unfortunately, we don't do it. Which government, George W. Bush said during the global war on terror that we are in a war of ideas with radical Islamism. And I ask, which agency of the U.S. government hires warriors of ideas? And the answer is none of them do. And does that mean that there are none in the U.S. government? Well, there may have been a couple at the Voice of America, and there may be a couple who are capable of doing this sort of thing through CIA covert political action. But one doesn't do covert action unless the President of the United States authorizes it, and the President won't authorize it unless there is a constituency of people who recognize that something has to be done along these lines. And so we don't have a cadre of people who can be considered true economic warriors in the full integrated strategic sense of what that can mean. And here's the problem of the lack of education and lack of knowledge of integrated strategy. There are so many angles to this. I think it was Gordon Chang who was talking about the attempt to attack the dollar. One of the other guests was saying the attack. There's an attack on the dollar, an attempt to buy, for example, Australian iron ore using the renminbi, and what do we do in the national security sphere to try to protect the dollar? Well, look, for example, at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has enabling legislation through the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, which gives the Fed actually two different mandates. One is to maintain stability of the dollar, and the second is to try to maintain full employment. And oftentimes these two different mandates clash with one another. And of course, it is a sign of this legislation is a sign of complete conceptual confusion, because maintaining full employment should be the job of fiscal policy and not of monetary policy. And so that right there is a piece of legislation that needs to be radically changed in order to fix the entire problem of the Federal Reserve's role in protecting the dollar. That's just one little item. But then, of course, you just raised with Grant the whole problem of elite capture. And how many people are able to see this webinar of yours, Frank? You have had so many of these magnificent webinars, and yet there's a very restricted audience to these things, and that's because everybody else who in the world who might be talking about these things are silent. And that's either because they're ignorant of it, which is usually the case, but then many of them have been corrupted. Something like half a dozen or seven of our most, prestigious blue chip think tanks like, for example, the Brookings Institution, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Carter Center, the East-West Center, the Atlantic Council, my own alma mater, Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, have all taken money from and done joint projects with front organizations of Chinese intelligence. And how often have these famous think tanks told us the truth about Chinese strategic developments that are inimical to the national security of the United States? Total silence. And the Washington Post and the New York Times for a couple of decades were taking millions of dollars from the Chinese propagandists to publish their China Watch supplement, which was classic communist propaganda. And did that affect a lot of people? Maybe it did some, but the real effect was the total silence of these two most important organs of the media when it came to the Chinese military buildup, Chinese economic warfare, Chinese propaganda, political influence operations, and subversion in the United States. And so there's only, one thing that we have on our side in this Cold War, which is going on, is we've got the truth. And the problem is that our national leaders have not done nearly enough to tell the world the truth about all of this. President Trump needs to get on national television. He needs to put out a podcast. He needs to get on social media. He needs to have an all points bulletin to the nation about what we're talking about here on this webinar. And the closest thing that happened to that in the Trump 1 administration was Mike Pence's speech to the Hudson Institute at the end of 2018, which was likened to Winston Churchill's Fulton, Missouri Iron Curtain speech. But, the president needs to get out there and do this. He needs to, because this is what's going to build a pro-defense consensus. He needs to talk about getting rare earths mined and processed in this country at warp speed. He worked on warp speed for the COVID vaccine. We need to do it for our pharmaceuticals. We need to do it for rare earths and maybe a few other things. We used to make our pharmaceuticals in Puerto Rico, where Puerto Rico had very favorable tax arrangements. And it was really worthwhile for our pharmaceutical companies to make them there. And then they decided, oh, big pharma is getting so rich, we're just going to start, killing the goose that lays the golden egg. And the goose left and went to China, and there we are. And of course, these are all different dimensions that integrated strategic thinking will reveal if you are an integrated strategic thinker. But we do not have that. We do not have integrated strategic thinking located in the US government unless there happen to be a few such thinkers on the National Security Council staff. The State Department effectively does not have this kind of thinking. Its entire culture is in favor of government-to-government diplomacy. It doesn't think about public diplomacy or political warfare. It does a little public diplomacy. But if we really want to be serious about this and put China on the defensive, we not only have to stop the financing of all the things that they're doing, we have to severely restrict their ability to steal our intellectual property. We should not be letting, hundreds of thousands of Chinese to be operating in this country with impunity. During the Cold War, we would not let Soviets do what we're letting the Chinese do today. They could not travel any more than 25 miles from their respective diplomatic posts, whether it was the embassy in Washington, their post in New York at the United Nations, or a couple of consulates around the country. 25 miles, that was it. But we let the Chinese go everywhere. And it was one of our alumni has testified, who is one of the most decorated intelligence officers of any of the intelligence agencies under the Pentagon's umbrella. There are 25,000 Chinese intelligence collectors in Silicon Valley alone. Why do we let this? Why do we give them visas? Barack Obama gave 10-year visas to something like 1 million Chinese. The whole thing is staggering what we do to let them steal our, cutting edge technology that is that which could conceivably, if we were to implement it quickly into our defense systems and so on, and into our corporations to be economically competitive, we could still enjoy that edge. But even Defense Department funded technology for defense purposes is being implemented in the Chinese military equipment sooner than our acquisitions, our lethargic acquisitions process is able to implement it in our own systems. The whole thing is a conceptual scandal, a failure in our overall national security policy. And if anybody wants to have others fix this properly, they should come to the Institute of World Politics, iwp.edu, and we can teach you how to be an integrated strategic thinker. iwp.edu.
Thank you, John Lanchowski. A well-deserved plug for a really superb program. And I want to just in the closing minute or two, John, with you, and thank you for being our cleanup batter and staying with us. Integrated strategic thought is something that you have practiced and I think really exemplified in the course of your career, both in public service as well as in the private sector. Could you give us just a sort of very cursory treatment of how that is evidenced in your experience in government? I would personally suggest, the Reagan integrated strategy for taking down the Soviet Union, and you played a role in it. Would you point to that as an example?
Yes, it's a very simple thing. We implemented a number of presidential directives, and perhaps the most important one was NSDD, National Security Decision Directive 75, which summarizes what our overall strategy toward the Soviet Empire should be. And it involves everything from bolstering our military to restricting technology to having a vigorous information campaign, and a campaign that is designed to encourage political change within the Soviet Union itself. I have written an article, the only article that I know about that deals with an offensive Cold War strategy that is designed to achieve what I call genuine peace with China. And what's genuine peace with China? That it's with the Chinese nation and not with the Chinese Communist Party. We will never have peace with China until the Communist Party is gone. And the only way that's going to happen is the way the peoples of the Soviet Empire, the captive nations, and even Russians themselves overthrew the Communist Party and ensured that it would collapse. And the way we do that is through a strategy of political, ideological, informational, cultural warfare against the Communist Party. We have to declare the Chinese people and the other captive peoples of the Chinese Empire, the Mongolians, the Tibetans, the Hui, the Uyghurs, we declare them to be our allies in a common struggle against totalitarianism. And we need to communicate with them. There are lots of people in China who are sort of comfortably middle class. But who are those people? They're people who have a cozy relationship with the Communist Party and with the Communist Party's sources of capital, namely their party-controlled banks. And when you have that cozy relationship, you can have your business and you can make money and so on and so forth. But there are 1 billion people in China who don't have that, and they chafe under the capricious and arbitrary administration of so-called Communist Party justice. And there are 180,000 civil disturbances in China every year, as many as 180,000 of people protesting Chinese Communist Party corruption and injustice, and yet everything in that country is atomized. Human beings are separated from one another because of the massive internal security system of the party state, and so people live in fear and they live in mistrust. And when you live in fear and mistrust, you cannot organize into cells of resistance. And so the party keeps people, those who don't like living under communism, they keep them in a state of hopelessness, despair, loneliness, and fatalistic acceptance of their lot, and futile resignation. And if we were to conduct psychological strategy on the strategic level, not simply the tactical level, like dropping leaflets over troop concentrations to demoralize them or to teach them how to surrender, we would try to increase the hope, the quotient of hope amongst these people, which is what Ronald Reagan did when he called the Soviets an evil empire. And when he called them an evil empire, those words reverberated. When he bore witness to the truth, this is the thing, but he bore witness to the human rights violations, the tyranny. He told the truth, and those words of his reverberated into the dankest corridors of the Gulag archipelago, and people like Anatoly Sharansky, who's now Natan Sharansky, member of the Israeli Knesset, heard those words, and all of a sudden it was a burst of new hope that perhaps now an American president stopped censoring himself in order to appease the Kremlin bosses and started to tell the actual truth. And so, as Solzhenitsyn said, one word of truth outweighs the world. And if we were to communicate in these ways, restore our broadcasts over the Voice of America and Radio Free Asia to the peoples of the Chinese Empire in many languages, and we would let these people know they are not all alone, and there is hope, because that's what Ronald Reagan and John Paul II did in the Soviet Empire. Now, we put a lot of material pressure on the Soviets. We restricted the technology. We did so by allying ourselves with our, with other high-tech, highly industrialized countries, Japan and our European allies. We through the so-called COCOM, the Committee on Multilateral Export Controls. And it's something that needs to be resurrected right now. Amen. Scott Bessent is on the right track in talking about allying with our friends on all of this. But we put other material pressures. We showed them that we showed people inside the Soviet Empire that resistance was possible, because the Nicaraguan campesinos could successfully resist the Nicaraguan communist regime. The Mujahideen in Afghanistan showed that they could successfully resist the Soviet invasion and occupation. Resistance was possible. It was not futile, and which is why the Polish Solidarity people were stealing Soviet arms and sending them to Nicaragua. So anyway, this is an entire integrated strategy. I have a whole, if you Google my name and Cold War strategy, you'll find my article published by the Intelligencer, the Journal of U.S. Intelligence Studies.
It's truly required reading, John, and thank you for illuminating so many aspects of it in that very comprehensive explanation of what such a strategy not only could look like, but was, and how successful it was, and for what reasons. I just would ask you in closing, John, how do you respond to an argument that I gather is being insinuated into the councils of government at the highest levels at the moment in this country, where we're looking at opportunities, as you've described them, for a similar integrated strategic assault on the Chinese Communist Party? You've touched on a number of things that need to be done, but the argument made apparently convincingly, at least in some quarters, is that, oh, you can't assault the Chinese Communist Party. You can't, more to the point, bring them down, because that would produce chaos. And the chaos would in turn destabilize, well, part of Asia at a minimum, and possibly the world economy and so on. Could you characterize, having been there when similar arguments were made to President Reagan, and walk us through how we should be thinking about this moment? And I, for one, it's the point of so many of these webinars, is the trajectory we're on now with the Chinese Communist Party is not safe. It is not sound. It is not responsible, for reasons that we've discussed in the course of this wonderful webinar. But what would you say, John, to this idea that, we mustn't go there? This is too risky.
The first thing I would say, Frank, is that argument is decades old Chinese communist propaganda. And whoever uses it is repeating a Chinese Communist Party talking point that is so, it is so old and crusty. It's amazing that anybody would pull it out of the closet. That's the first thing. It is standard communist propaganda to scare everybody to death. And the one thing that I can say to that is that the Chinese people and the other peoples in the Chinese Empire are capable of democracy. Taiwan is a great example of a democratic country. And it may be that you don't go immediately from Chinese communism into democracy. So sometimes you need to have an Ataturk type of a person who will run the country in a relatively authoritarian way as a stepping stone towards bringing about democracy. Ataturk in Turkey had a policy of trying to get people engaged in the political party structure, so that once they were inside a political party structure that was not all top down in terms of the ideas, but where you could put good ideas from the bottom and make them go from the bottom up, and that this would encourage greater participation. There are many paths to this sort of thing. We saw, sometimes you can try to have a democratic arrangement come too quickly, as happened during the Arab Spring in Egypt, where the only organized faction was the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
And all the other more democratically oriented forces didn't have the time to organize, and yet we were encouraging them to have elections right away, and the only people who were organized were going to win that election, which is what happened.
Yes.
And so there are, if we accept this, if we accept the status quo, then you're just going to, we're going to let them win.
Right.
They will never be on the defensive, and we will always be on the defensive. And yet nobody is talking about offensive action. And by the way, offensive action is nothing but reciprocity. Take a look at the entire litany of actions that they take against us in every sphere. And I'm just simply recommending a policy of reciprocity. And
Thank you, John.
If we're incapable of reciprocity, then we may as well hang up the republic and then live under totalitarianism.
A cardinal principle. John, we have to leave it at that. We've gone a little bit longer than I bargained for, but thank you very helpfully so with your good remarks as well as our Q&A.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say I am heartened that there does seem to be a growing awareness inside the Trump administration that this war is indeed upon us. I think that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's remarks and those of Jamison Greer, the trade representative, at the press conference they had midweek is evidence of that kind of, clarity. It remains to be seen, though, as John has very helpfully described, whether the next step is accommodation or to insist on reciprocity and to push back toward the end of bringing about the only outcome that ultimately can secure our country, our way of life, and our people from the predations of the Chinese communists, which, as all of our speakers really have pointed out, is nothing short of the destruction of this country. So I want to thank all of our participants, Nick Iacovella, Sam Faddis, Gordon Chang, Jim Fennell, Grant Newsom, and John Lanchowski for an exceptionally informative program and the opportunity to lay out, really, both the truth that we need to be braced by and the kinds of steps that are required to act constructively on that truth for, as our old boss Ronald Reagan used to say, for our children and our children's children who will otherwise face the prospect of being told what it was like to live in the United States when men were free. We here at the Committee on the Present Danger of China are determined not to let that be our fate or that of our children and our children's children. We hope that these webinars, especially this one, will be very, very much conducive to enlisting the American people in pushing back against that. We want to thank our friends at Epic Times and NTD for live streaming this program and making it available to hopefully many, many people. And we also want to thank each of you for doing what we always enjoin you to do, which is to take these videos and share them as widely as you can. And if so, that we will, I hope, continue to be both free and able to help others achieve the freedom that they aspire to as well. God bless you all, and thank you for your time today. We'll look forward to visiting with you on the next occasion. Please be sure to subscribe to this program at Present Danger China to ensure that you get notice of when the next program will be and participate in it as well. I want to thank Oleg Bashian, our wonderful technical guru who makes all these programs possible. And again, my thanks to this marvelous committee, the Present Danger China, for its sponsorship of the programs. God bless you all.